Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. The bus hissed as it came to a stop, the doors folding open with a tired sigh. I stepped down onto the sidewalk, the soles of my boots crunching against the July dust. 25 years abroad, and still, nothing about this small college town had changed, except me. I adjusted the strap of my shoulder bag and took a breath, the air tasting faintly of pine and baked concrete. My name is Maya Verma. I'm 57 years old, and after a long career in Europe as a researcher and ethics consultant for international academic institutions, I had finally retired. Not for rest, not even for peace. I had come back home to reconnect with the family I left behind. The walk from the bus depot to our old house took 20 minutes. It used to feel shorter when I was younger, back when my father would drive me to campus or when Denise and I would take turns racing bikes down the hill. But now, the path felt unfamiliar, like I didn't belong here anymore. When I reached the house, my chest tightened. It looked the same on the outside, the same steep roof, the same white siding, but there was a new gate. Tall, black, cold. There were cameras now, a keypad lock. I hadn't expected a red carpet, but I didn't expect surveillance either. I reached for the intercom and pressed the call button. It clicked, then buzzed with static. "Hello," I said, peering up into the camera. "It's Maya Verma. I used to live here. I'm looking for Denise." There was a long pause. Then a familiar voice crackled through. "Maya?" It was Denise, flat, tired, but unmistakable. "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "I just got into town. I wanted to say hello. I know it's been a long time." Another pause. Then the click of the line going dead. I waited. A minute later, a campus security SUV pulled into the driveway from the side road. Two uniformed men stepped out. "Can I help you, ma'am?" One of them asked, not unkindly. I'm Maya Verma. This is my childhood home. I just got back from Europe and wanted to see my family. My sister, Denise, she's the one who called us." The other one said quietly. "Said a woman was trying to access the property without permission." "She what?" The taller officer's radio crackled. Then Denise's voice came through again, cold and even. "She's not on the deed. Tell her to leave." I stepped back, swallowing hard. "She knows who I am. That's my sister. I don't understand." "She said the family's moved on, ma'am," the first officer said. "Said you're not part of the household anymore. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the property." I stood there, stunned, as the two men waited. The camera above blinked red. I turned and walked back down the driveway, past the gate that had no code for me, under a house that no longer had my name. My hands shook, not out of fear, but from something colder, something final. This wasn't a misunderstanding. They didn't forget me. They erased me. I slept in my rental car that night, not by choice, but because I had nowhere else to go. The town's motels were either full from summer conferences or out of my budget for more than a few days, especially now that I was living on a modest academic pension. I parked along the curb across from the house, my house, and reclined the seat, trying to ignore the ache in my back and the growing fog in my head. Sometime around 3 a.m., I started going through my old documents on my laptop. Birth certificate, research credentials, a scanned copy of the original deed to the house, my name listed there from decades ago, back when I still had a key. But in the county property database, my name was gone, not even listed as a former owner, like I'd never existed. By sunrise, the ache in my chest had turned sharp. I stepped out of the car, stretched my legs, and looked up at the house again. That's when I saw it. A brand new for sale sign staked into the lawn. It hadn't been there yesterday. I walked up to it like it might speak. Fresh paint, perfectly drilled into the ground. Someone was selling the house, and quickly. I backed away before Denise could send security again. At a coffee shop near campus, I nursed a bitter latte and stared out the window, wondering what the hell had happened to the family I once knew. That's when I heard my name. "Maya?" I turned around. It was Lynn, my old college roommate, 25 years older but just as sharp-eyed and fast-talking as ever. She wore a blazer with real estate pins on the lapel. "Lynn," I said, stunned, "you're still in town?" She gave a wry smile. "Can't leave this place. It keeps sucking me back in." "I heard about the listing. Meadowlight Street, right? That's your old place." I nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," she said, growing serious, "but your name isn't on the record anymore. It transferred last fall to something called Meadowlight Capital Trust. Weird timing. It looks like it was a private sale. A what? Lynn pulled out her tablet and opened a document. See this? It says the property was sold by Maya Verma. I blinked. That's not possible. I figured as much, she said, especially since the notary listed here, Dwayne Kettler. He's been under investigation, known for signing documents without proper ID verification. A few complaints already filed. My hands tightened around the coffee cup. You think Denise did this? I don't know. But someone forged your signature. And if that trust is connected to a family member, well, that's fraud, Maya. Lynn tapped the screen and pulled up another document. Also, this trust, Meadowlight Capital, no real website, no board of directors, just a mailbox address in Atlanta and a routing number that traces back to a shell account in Illinois. I swallowed hard. They erased me from the deed, I said quietly. They made it look like I handed it over. Lynn nodded grimly. This isn't just shady, it's criminal. I leaned back in the chair, my brain moving faster than it had in months. Someone had stolen my name, my legacy, and my right to exist in the house I grew up in. And now they were trying to sell it, like I'd never mattered. Then, I guess, I said, staring out the window, it's time I started digging. Lynn and I set up shop in her home office, which doubled as her teenage son's former bedroom. The walls were still plastered with faded rock posters, but her desk was state-of-the-art. 3 monitors, dual phones, and a printer that sounded like a jet engine. She worked like a machine, sifting through records, real estate databases, and Shell Corporation registries, while I compiled every document I had, old emails, property tax receipts, and whatever fragments of my past still lived on my hard drive. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We were both trained to follow patterns. Around midnight, Lynn let out a low whistle. Here it is, she said, swiveling her monitor toward me. Meadowlight Capital is tied to something called Safe Harbor Logistics, LLC. Guess who's listed as procurement consultant? I leaned in and saw the name. Vincent Reyes, Denise's husband. Vincent had always been quiet, polite in that detached, methodical way. He'd worked in procurement at the university for over 15 years. I remembered him from holidays, stiff in his cardigan, always glancing at his watch. I never paid him much attention. Apparently, I should have. You think he created Meadowlight? I asked. Lynn shrugged. If he didn't create it, he's definitely running money through it. And get this, Safe Harbor has no active operations listed. No employees, no inventory, nothing except 2 recent wire transfers totaling just under $200,000. From where? She clicked a few windows. University Foundation Board, labeled as grant disbursements. I blinked. You think they use my credentials? Lynn looked at me. You were on every brochure the school printed for ethics and academic research. Your name carried weight. It wouldn't be hard to fake a grant approval letter with your signature on it, especially if your sister is on the finance committee. I leaned back in the chair, mind spinning. That's when I noticed the piece of paper under Lynn's door. It hadn't been there an hour ago. I got up, slid it into the light, and unfolded it. Plain white, black ink, typed in a font that looked like it hadn't been updated since Windows 95. If you're really Maya, come to parking lot C behind the Fine Arts Building. 11 p.m., no name, no signature, just a time and place. Lynn stared at it. You think it's a setup? Maybe, I said. But it's the first invitation I've gotten in this town. At 10:50, I parked at the far edge of Lot C, where a row of flickering sodium lights barely lit the perimeter. The university's Fine Arts Building loomed nearby, quiet and skeletal in the dark. A figure stepped out from behind the dumpster near the edge of the lot. He moved slow, cautious. Dr. Verma? I nodded. Who are you? Curtis, he said, glancing over his shoulder. Used to work at T for the campus. They bumped me to janitorial after I started asking questions. What kind of questions? About shipments going through the faculty warehouse after hours. No manifests. Crates. No cameras working when they move. Saw Vincent there more than once. Alone? He shook his head. Always with a guy I couldn't see clearly, but I heard your name once. Something about making sure you stayed gone. My mouth went dry. Curtis looked at me, serious now. Whatever they're doing, it ain't just property theft. It's deeper, messier, and they're scared of you. I nodded slowly, heart pounding. Good, I said. Let's make them more scared. I started carrying my old field recorder again, a tiny black brick of a device, once used for documenting oral histories and witness interviews. Now it was my insurance policy. Curtis and I mapped out the backlot of the faculty warehouse using old campus schematics. He showed me a corner where one of the security cameras had been under repair for nearly 6 months. I wedged the recorder into a vent near the rear loading bay one night just after midnight, tucking it between the metal slats with a twist of wire. Then I waited. I parked half a block away in Lynn's beat-up hatchback. The rearview mirror was cracked, and the air conditioner spat warm air, but it was perfect, anonymous. I watched the warehouse through a pair of borrowed binoculars and listened to silence until 2 silhouettes appeared. One tall, wearing a vest, Vincent. The other older, heavier, with a slight limp. My stomach dropped. My father. They spoke in low tones, too quiet to hear from this far, but the mic was running. I watched them step through the side door and disappear into the shadows inside. 30 minutes later, they emerged again, this time more tense. Vincent walked off alone. My father stayed behind, his face upturned like he was smelling the night air, or listening for something. Then he turned and looked straight toward my hiding spot. I ducked. By the time I dared look again, he was gone. The next morning, I slipped back to the warehouse just before sunrise and reached into the vent. The recorder was gone. I stood there, frozen. Someone had known. Someone had been watching. Or worse, they'd known exactly where to look. Back in the car, my hands trembled. I fumbled with my phone, my notes, anything to stay grounded. That's when a new email arrived in my inbox. No subject, no sender name, just a single line. We hear you've been digging. Maybe the Department of Mental Health should hear about that breakdown in Oslo. I stared at the screen. They were going for my reputation now. The Oslo reference was real. A temporary leave I took after a colleague died unexpectedly, and I collapsed from stress. It was documented, yes, but confidential, unless someone had been combing through my academic records. I closed the laptop, heart racing. I could hear it in my head. The whisper campaign they'd start. She's unstable. Maybe she made it up. You know she took a leave for mental health reasons, right? That's how they'd erase me again. Not through deeds or signatures, but doubt. I drove straight to Lynn's. When she opened the door, she took one look at my face and said, "What happened?" "They know I'm here," I said, "and now they're trying to take my name." She locked the door behind me. "Then it's time," she said, voice steel. "We fight fire with data." I nodded. "Then I need to find Raj." Raj picked up on the second ring. "Doctor? Verma?" "It's Maya," I said. "I need your help." He hesitated for a beat. "I haven't heard from you since Zurich. I thought you'd vanished." "I did," I said, "but now I'm back. And I'm being erased." By noon the next day, Raj was sitting across from me in Lynn's home office, tapping away at his laptop like his fingers were trying to beat the truth out of the keyboard. His beard was fuller, his hoodie more tattered, but his brain was still the sharpest I'd ever taught. He had been one of my research assistants once, the kind who wrote code between classes and broke encryption for fun. Now he was my firewall. Lynn brought in Greg, a legal contact from her days in city planning, who took one look at the forged sale documents and said, "This isn't just fraud. It's a coordinated paper trail." He started snapping photos and filing requests to the county registrar, while Raj and I worked through the metadata, buried in years of archived university files. Curtis joined us in the evenings, still in his janitor uniform, nodding quietly as he handed over old security logs and server IDs from when he worked IT. The picture was starting to form. They'd used me as the foundation. Raj pulled up an internal grant approval form from the University Foundation Board and zoomed in. "Look at this," he said. "Grant ID number 22F-Maya. That's your initials. And here's the signature line. Your name. But the timestamp? It's 6 months after you left the continent. This was submitted remotely using a VPN traced through a proxy in Philadelphia. Who submitted it?" He clicked again. The originating IP matches 3 others, all tied to Vincent Reyes's university account. Lynn leaned over his shoulder. "That's theft, and wire fraud if those funds crossed state lines." "And they did," Raj added. The grant money was deposited into an account registered under Meadowlight Capital. From there, it was funneled through a series of dummy LLCs, Safe Harbor, Eastwell Consultants, and something called ThornX Holdings. "That one's in Delaware." "Of course it is," I muttered. "Delaware, the laundromat of corporate ghosts." But the worst part came next. "Greg found this in the university archives," Lynn said, sliding a printout across the table. A resignation letter from you, dated 4 years ago. On official letterhead, I read it once. Then again, I never wrote this, I said. It says you voluntarily terminated your faculty affiliation, Greg explained, and revoked your access to departmental resources. It's signed and notarized. By who? Raj didn't even look up. Same guy as the deed transfer, Dwayne Kettler. Busy man, apparently. My hands shook. They erased me on paper first. That's how they made the grant theft look legitimate. If I was no longer affiliated, then I wasn't around to contest anything. It's not just the grants, Raj added. Vincent's procurement logs show bulk inventory orders sent to campus facilities, billed through the foundation using fake academic budgets. They tagged it as equipment for Verma Fellowship, which, last I checked, doesn't exist. Denise is treasurer of the board, Lynn said. She'd have oversight on every one of those transactions. I sat back in the chair, stunned. This was deeper than I'd imagined. They didn't just forge a deed, they built a world where I never existed. Or worse, where I willingly walked away. They hollowed out my academic identity and turned it into a skeleton key for laundering money, for hiding assets, for wiping me off the map. But they made one mistake. They underestimated what I'd remember and who would stand beside me. Keep digging, I told Raj. If they built a digital lie, we're going to burn it down with the truth. We filed the injunction 2 days later. Greg handled the county paperwork with surgical precision, citing title fraud, identity misappropriation, and deed forgery. He stapled copies of every forged signature, every wire transfer, every doctored document right to the front. Lynn walked with me into the registrar's office, where the clerk at the front desk looked up with a smile that quickly faded when she saw the size of the packet Greg dropped onto the counter. This is a fraud and title injunction, Greg said calmly. You're going to want to call your supervisor. That afternoon, we served Denise. Lynn insisted on delivering the envelope herself, right to Denise's office at the university's financial services wing. The receptionist tried to stonewall, saying Denise was in a meeting, but Lynn didn't blink. I'll wait, she said, placing the thick legal envelope on the front desk. But please let her know that this is time-sensitive. Also, that we know. Denise came out 5 minutes later, her hair perfect, her blazer pressed, her smile just brittle enough to crack. Maya, she said coolly, you should have called. I didn't know you were still in town. You did, I said. You just hoped I'd leave quietly. She picked up the envelope and flipped through the first few pages. Her fingers faltered. For a second, her face dropped, just enough for me to see the panic before she snapped back into her usual mask. This is nonsense, she said. Tell it to the registrar, Lynn said. Or the ethics board. Or the Department of Educational Oversight. They all got copies this morning. Denise's mouth opened, then closed. I turned to leave. I had no interest in her excuses, but outside, in the shaded parking lot behind the registrar's building, Vincent was waiting. He leaned against a pillar, arms crossed, watching us approach. He wore dark sunglasses and a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. Maya, he said, pushing off the wall, you're playing a dangerous game. I didn't stop walking. Not a game. A correction. He stepped in front of me. You're not built for this kind of war. You should have stayed in Europe. I looked him in the eye, unflinching. You think this is the first time I've faced men like you? His jaw twitched. You're going to ruin your own family. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I worked in UNESCO's ethics division for over a decade. I've helped expose academic fraud in countries where speaking up meant jail. You think I'm scared of you? Vincent tried to smile again, but there was no confidence behind it now. Only calculation. I pulled out a flash drive from my coat pocket. On here is a list of every offshore account connected to Meadowlight Capital, every purchase order tied to Safe Harbor Logistics, every approval Denise signed under my name. I've already submitted them to the Department of Oversight. Vincent's smirk vanished. I turned away and walked back toward the car. Lynn followed silently. Neither of us looked back. Back at her house, Greg was waiting by the printer. He handed me a copy of the confirmation. Our injunction was formally filed. Meadowlight Capital could no longer legally sell or transfer the property. The house wasn't theirs to sell. And now, finally, the law knew it too. The federal inquiry hit like a storm. It started with a subpoena. Something official, something I could hold in my hands. The envelope was thick, stamped in red. Its contents a series of demands. The Department of Educational Oversight had launched an investigation into Meadowlight Capital. They wanted every file, every email, every scrap of correspondence linking Vincent Reyes, Denise, and the university to the fraudulent activities surrounding the property. By the end of the week, Vincent was on administrative leave from the university. Denise had been quietly removed from the finance committee, and the school's foundation board, to their surprise, was under federal review. That's when the calls started. At first, it was my mother. I hadn't heard from her in months. She left a voicemail, panicked, breathless. "Maya, I thought I was protecting us. Maybe I was wrong." I stood there, staring at the phone, wondering if she was talking about the last decade or about the last 24 hours. Then came my father's letter. It arrived in an unmarked envelope, the handwriting slanted but familiar. Inside was a single line. "I tried to keep the legacy alive. Please, can we talk?" I folded it carefully, setting it aside. Talking would come later. Right now, I had no intention of forgiving him, or any of them. The next morning, a package arrived from a former dean at the university, Dr. Alan Greer, someone I used to trust. I opened the box slowly, expecting more disappointment. Instead, I found a stack of photographs and a USB drive. The photos were grainy, but clear enough. My grandfather sitting at a desk, surrounded by a group of faculty members. One of them was Dr. Greer, much younger but unmistakable. But it wasn't the faces that mattered. It was the object in my grandfather's hand, a bequest letter, a legal document. The writing was shaky but legible. To my granddaughter, Maya Verma, the sole heir to the property and academic legacy of the Verma family estate. This includes the land, the university archives, and all associated assets. Should I pass, I wish for her to carry this torch forward. The legal legitimacy of the bequest, confirmed by the university's legal team when my grandfather passed, was irrefutable. I slipped the USB into my laptop, the screen lighting up with files that made my pulse race. The videos weren't just simple family footage. They were from meetings, secret meetings, the kind no one was supposed to know about. There was my father, his voice low, his face flickering with concern as he discussed cutting her out for good with Denise. Then there was a recording from just a few weeks ago. My father, slurring his words, pleading with Denise to move forward with the fake transfer of the house, the one he'd sworn would make everything right. The trail was clear. The conspiracy was not just academic fraud or property theft. It was a coordinated attempt to erase my involvement, to strip me of my inheritance, my legacy, my very right to my family's history. I looked at Lynn, who had been sitting beside me, reading over my shoulder. "It's all here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "They used my name to hide this." She nodded grimly. "And they'll try to bury you under this too. You're a threat now, Maya, a real one." I turned back to the screen. "I'm not going to let them." As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. A text. "Maya, I'm sorry. Your father is asking for mercy. Please don't destroy us." It was from my mother. She had reached out to me before, but this felt different. It felt like desperation. I didn't respond right away. My mind was elsewhere, piecing together the bigger picture. But just as I was about to close the laptop, another email came through. This one from Dr. Greer. "Maya, I have one more piece of your grandfather's legacy. It's time you see it." The email included a scanned document, a formal letter from my grandfather to the university's board of trustees. It outlined, in plain language, his intent for the academic foundation and the ownership of the property. "Maya Verma is the rightful heir. No one may alter this unless she chooses to relinquish it." I sat back, stunned. This wasn't just about a house. It was about the truth. Suddenly, I knew. I wasn't fighting just for me. I was fighting for everything they had tried to erase. I stood up slowly, closing the laptop and turning to Lynn. "Let's get the paperwork to the Department of Oversight. We're not stopping here." As I left her office, the weight of what was coming next settled in. Federal subpoenas, financial audits, maybe even the unraveling of my family's carefully built facade. But I wasn't scared anymore. Because they had underestimated me, and now I had the truth and the law on my side. The courtroom was packed. I hadn't anticipated the spectacle, but here we were. The room was a sea of faces. Press, faculty members, former students who had once admired my work, and those who had seen my name plastered across the local news. I sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Lynn and Greg. My laptop was open, my notes scattered around me, but I wasn't looking at them. Instead, I was staring across the room at my family. Denise sat stiffly in the defendant's seat, her attorney whispering to her, his face as unreadable as a stone. Vincent stood behind her, his arms crossed in his usual defensive posture. But it was my father, who stood out most. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped like he'd aged 10 years in the span of a month. When our eyes met, he looked away quickly, as if ashamed to be seen. The trial had started slowly, with the usual preliminary statements. But today was different. Today I would testify. Doctor? Verma! The judge called. If you would please take the stand. I rose, feeling every eye in the room on me, but my legs were steady. I walked across the polished floor to the witness chair, sat, and took a deep breath. The prosecutor, a man with a calm demeanor and a voice that commanded attention, walked toward me. Dr. Verma, he began, thank you for being here today. I understand this has been a difficult process for you. I nodded, my voice low. It has. We've reviewed your academic records, your professional history, and the forged documents in question. I'd like to start with something simple. Can you confirm the nature of your relationship with the property known as Meadowlight House? I blinked. The question felt almost trivial, but the weight of it hit me all the same. The house, my home, had been the centerpiece of everything. My past, my family, my legacy. I grew up there, I said. It's my childhood home. It was left to me by my grandfather, along with the rights to manage the family's academic foundation. Your name, he continued, was originally on the deed to the house, correct? Yes. But at some point, your name was removed? I swallowed, hard. Yes, I came to learn that my family, through forged documents and illegal transactions, erased my name from the deed and transferred ownership. They sold the property under false pretenses, and I was not notified. And you have proof of this? I nodded again. I have emails, financial records, signatures that were forged, and even recordings of meetings where my father and my sister discussed removing me from the family assets. There is no question that this was a deliberate attempt to erase me, to erase my role in the family legacy. The prosecutor nodded, turning toward the judge. Your Honor, we have presented evidence that these illegal actions, perpetrated by the defendants, were a coordinated effort to deprive Dr. Verma of her rightful inheritance. I now ask for the court's attention as Dr. Verma presents a recording of a conversation where her father himself admits to the plan. The audio started, crackling through the speakers. If she gets too close, my father's voice echoed, distorted but unmistakable, we cut her out for good. It's the only way. We have to protect what's ours. The room was silent. I saw Denise flinch, her hand gripping the table as if she were trying to hold herself together. Vincent didn't move, but my father, who had always been my protector, hung his head in shame. The prosecutor allowed the room to absorb the weight of the conversation before asking, Dr. Verma, can you explain how this situation has affected you? I took a long, steadying breath. It has torn my life apart, I said quietly. My career, my identity, everything I worked for. They tried to take it from me. They didn't just steal the house. They stole my name, my legacy, my family, and they thought they could get away with it. I turned to face my father for the first time. His eyes were dull. I had expected him to stand up, to speak, to defend himself, but he didn't. Your Honor, I said, voice shaking, they took everything from me, and I'm not going to let them get away with it. There was a silence. The judge looked at me, his expression impassive. Thank you, Dr. Verma. I stepped down from the stand, but the weight of the moment still lingered. The evidence was clear. The proof was irrefutable. Denise would try to claim that she didn't know. Vincent would try to weasel out of responsibility. And my father, as always, would try to hide behind the shame of it all. But the truth was now out, and this time they couldn't erase it. When the court recessed for lunch, I stood outside, my hands trembling. The sunlight felt different today. There was weight to it, like it was finally touching the places I had tried to protect for so long. Lynn joined me, her face somber but determined. Do you feel it? She asked. I nodded, glancing back toward the courthouse doors. Yeah, it's coming. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The verdict came 2 weeks later. In the courtroom, the tension was palpable as the judge read through the charges. The room was quieter than I'd ever heard it before, the air thick with expectation. Denise, Vincent, and my father were still in the defendant's seats, their faces drawn tight, their lawyers doing everything they could to maintain composure. After careful deliberation, the judge said, his voice steady. The court finds the defendants guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, academic misconduct, and unlawful property transfer. The evidence presented by Dr. Verma, along with corroborating testimony and supporting documentation, has proven beyond reasonable doubt that these actions were premeditated and deliberate. My heart raced, a wave of relief crashing over me. But the judge's next words made it real. Denise Verma, you are sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for your role in orchestrating this fraudulent scheme. Vincent Reyes, you are sentenced to 8 years for your involvement in falsifying university records and unlawfully transferring assets. Robert Verma, you are sentenced to 10 years for conspiracy, abuse of power, and fraud. Your actions have not only harmed Dr. Verma, but also damaged the integrity of the university and the trust placed in you as a faculty member. I barely heard the rest of the details, my mind racing with the weight of it all. My family, the people I once thought I could turn to, were now facing the consequences of what they had done to me, to my legacy. Denise's face went white, her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Vincent's eyes were downcast, his posture slumped in defeat. But it was my father who broke my heart, even as justice was served. He didn't look at me once, as if pretending I wasn't there would somehow undo everything. I didn't know how to feel. Vindicated? Yes. Relieved? Definitely. But there was something else, something heavy in my chest that refused to settle. As the bailiffs began leading them out of the courtroom, I stood there frozen. I hadn't come here for vengeance. I hadn't come to see them punished. I had come for justice, for the truth. But now that it was happening, now that they were going to prison, I felt something I hadn't expected. Emptiness. Lynn, who had been standing quietly beside me, put a hand on my shoulder. You did it, she said softly. I nodded, though I didn't know how to answer. The gavel had fallen, the law had spoken, but all I could think about was the years lost. The family I'd been erased from, the name that had been stolen from me. Outside the courthouse, the press was waiting. Cameras flashed as reporters shoved microphones in my face, asking about the trial, the verdict, the future. I pushed past them, my thoughts far away from the questions they asked. I wasn't ready for any of this, but I knew what I had to do next. I walked past the crowd and into the university campus, past the buildings that used to mean something to me, past the familiar faces that no longer felt like home. I stopped in front of the university library, where a new wing had been built in honor of digital ethics. A small plaque was mounted on the wall, the engraved text simple, Dr. Maya Verma, Truth over Legacy. I touched the plaque gently, a quiet smile pulling at the corners of my lips. There it was. My name, finally, restored, not in the way I had hoped, not in the place I expected, but in the one place it mattered most. I had fought for truth, and in the end, I had restored my name. I didn't need the house. I didn't need the inheritance. I didn't need their approval. I had my legacy. And now, for the first time in my life, I could walk away from them, not with bitterness or anger, but with clarity. I walked away from the plaque, from the past, and into my future. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the quiet afternoon. And this time, I knew I was walking alone, but I wasn't afraid anymore.